I've always been a big fan of dungeon crawl type of games. So a couple of years ago I picked up Descent by Fantasy Flight. It was the first edition back then. And while I enjoyed the mechanics, the art, the idea, the miniatures, I didn't like the fact that you had a group playing against an Overlord. An Overlord that controls the monsters, controls the dungeon, pretty much is a sort of dungeon master narrator, but not exactly. When you're playing an RPG and a player is a narrator, you can still have some sort of complicity, empathy. You realize that you're not exactly playing against the narrator is telling you the story that contains elements that go against you and you go against those elements. But in Descent, the narrator is a player. The narrator will win if he kills you. And so you really have the sense of competition with the narrator, and I don't like how that results in everybody winning but one, or one player winning and a full team losing the game. Somehow it warps the social experience in the group. It makes it something that is less fun to play for me than a fully cooperative or a fully competitive game. So after I played the original Descent a couple of times, I simply traded my copy away, and that was it. Then a second edition of Descent came out. I wasn't all that interested, but I became very interested when I heard that there was an expansion called Forgotten Souls that would allow to play the game in solitaire mode, which is always a nice added bonus, or in fully co-op game. Before this, I had played the D&D board games and I enjoyed them, even though they're pretty simple, pretty linear. I enjoyed them in the past, but to me that was the best option for fully co-op dungeon crawling. Then in very recent times, Shadow Brimstone came out. I loved that game desperately, and that already put a nail in the coffin of the D&D board games. Then, if Descent with Forgotten Souls as a fully cooperative experience turns out to be even just a fraction as good as Shadow Brimstone, then definitely there will be little reasons for me to play the D&D board games in the future. So just because Forgotten Reason had come out, I purchased a copy of Descent, the second edition, just to try the co-op version. Yes, I also purchased Forgotten Souls, otherwise it would be a little silly of me to buy this one without the expansion that I wanted to try. So I played the game with the base set and with the Forgotten Souls expansion in fully co-op mode. Yes, you do need the base game. This is all you need. The expansion will not work with other sets. Let me tell you a little bit about Forgotten Souls. Actually, as I do that, and I'll tell you about Descent with Forgotten Souls, I'll also tell you a little bit about Descent in general. And then, in my conclusion, we'll try to answer the tough question. Is Descent going to put the final nail in the coffin of the D&D board games? Stay tuned, you'll find out. Just like in the regular game, in the co-op version of Descent, you will have in each turn first a player's round, a hero's round, and then you will have an overlord round. The difference is that now the overlord is controlled by the AI of the system. There are also some minor changes in what happens during the hero's round, but that's, as I said, minor. The hero's round pretty much works like in the traditional game. Heroes are represented by miniatures on the board, and they have cards that indicate the stats of the characters. Stats are movement points, health points, when they go down to 0 you're knocked out, stamina, which is a resource that you spend to perform special actions, and then defense dice. This indicates the type and number of dice that you roll when you're defending. There are also some abilities here, some characteristics of your character. The highest the value associated with them, the better it is for you. And these abilities may be tested throughout the game. Also, each character comes with a regular ability, a special ability, and a starting set of cards. Actually, each type of character can be customized. For example, the healer can be a disciple or can be a spirit speaker. The wizard can be a rune master, or a necromancer. So you choose which type of specialization you want your character to have, and then you take the corresponding mini deck, and that mini deck will give you starting items, starting abilities, and also abilities that you can use to upgrade. Cards that have a number printed in the top right corner of the card represent abilities that you can acquire as you upgrade your character by spending the corresponding number of experience points. That is the cost that you need to pay. Important difference from the basic game. In the co-op version, you start with 1 experience point, which you can spend immediately to purchase an ability, or you can save it. And characters will level up during the game. So during the game, there will be several times where you will have an opportunity to acquire new experience points and to spend them to acquire new abilities. Your character will grow and become stronger throughout the game. During each hero's turn, the heroes activate and they can perform 2 actions. The most common actions are to move and to attack. Attack is very simple. You pick up dice from the pool, the number and type of which will be determined by the weapons that you're carrying, the abilities that you're using. You roll the dice to attack, and you look at the heart, so the number of heart icons that you roll, that is the number of wounds that you're able to inflict on the opponent. If you're using a ranged weapon, then you also need to look at the numbers to see if you're able to match the range at which you're firing. For example, if you're firing at a target within 5 squares of distance, then with a 5 you will be fine. You need to match the distance from your shooting character to the target with the numbers that you're rolling. Also, there may be you may be able to roll lightning bolts. These are surge symbols, and they will allow you to activate special abilities. If you rolled an X on the blue die, then it's a miss. You ignore anything else, your attack simply missed. If you didn't miss, then you look at the wound icons, at the range icons, at the numbers, in case that's a range attack, and also at possible surges. Once you have the total amount of wounds that you inflict on the opponent, which may be affected by weapons, abilities, surges, the opponent will roll defense dice, the number and type of which are indicated on the card of the opponent. The opponent rolls the dice. You check the number of shield icons that the opponent rolled, subtract that from the number of wounds that you inflicted, and you have the total amount of wounds that have been inflicted on the opponent. And this is the basic idea behind combat. So main actions: attacking, moving. There are also other actions such as using a special skill or standing up if you've been knocked out, reviving an opponent that has been knocked out, opening a door, interacting with a search token, things like that. So characters alternate activating. The order of the activation for the characters can change from turn to turn. And then it is time for the enemies to act. But as I said, there are some changes in the hero's turn. An important one is about loot, about the way in which you find resources. And here is how it works. Each time that you defeat an opponent, you place a number of wound tokens on this track equal to the number of squares that the opponent occupied. Larger monsters add more tokens. You can simply move a token up there based on the number of squares occupied by the opponents that you killed. When this token reaches the space of the track corresponding to the number of players that are playing, actually I should say number of characters, because that may not be the same as number of players. When that token reaches the number of characters that are being used, 2, 3, or 4, then players find some loot, but to determine how they select their card, you look at this at the side of the track. Whenever a master monster is killed, you move a marker, or you add an extra marker on this track here, so that when finally the loot pays off, this marker may be on the 2 cards, or 3 cards, or 4 cards space of that track. So when that loot track hits, you draw a number of item cards equal to the number indicated on this side of the track, and then a card is selected. It is still only a card, but at least if this number is high, you get to choose the card that you want. After the loot has been found, the 2 tracks get to be reset, and then players again have to kill monsters to improve these 2 tracks and find new loot. The characters always start their adventure on this tile here, which is described in the onset, on the onset card. Areas in the game are represented by these cards. Each card describes a specific area. You always start with this card. I'm not going to show the other cards because I don't want to spoil anything for you. But suffice to say that as you move through the dungeon, you turn up a card, you look at the name of the card, and then there is a guide that will tell you how to set up the corresponding card. You always start from the onset, you always start from this card. Also, there are 3 cards here which are special cards. They create the main story. These cards always need to be placed in a specific way. You need to shuffle the deck in such a way that the first of those 3 cards is in the top third of the deck, the second card is more or less in the middle, and the third card is in the bottom third of the deck. So those cards will always be resolved in a certain order, but you do not know the order in which the other cards will end up in the deck. So you have a general narrative, which will be the same from game to game, with some variety in the order in which you will encounter the other rooms, and that also means the other monsters and the other challenges. Each location card tells you about the general effects of the room, things that apply, special effects that are triggered during the Overlord phase, and as I said, each card corresponds to a map on the encounter guide that you will use to set up the location, to select the tiles, and to place initial monsters on that area. So there will usually be a card face up that indicates the area that is being explored. There will be also conditions that will allow you to remove a card. But something tricky here, there are no cards face up here. That's perfectly possible. You may have heroes on the board and no cards here. Somehow that is bad. That triggers negative effects. How so? Well, let me show you how that works. There is this track here which is used to record the general situation of the dungeon. I would say the general level of evilness that is going on in the dungeon. And that is recorded on this side of this track here, the Overlord track. It has 2 tokens on it, a Fate token which is placed on top, and a Doom token which is placed towards the bottom of this track on the space indicating the number of characters that you have in the game. 2 characters, 3 characters, 4 characters. We have, for example, 4 characters, then you place the token there. Throughout the game, there will be negative effects that will force this token to go up, and this token always goes up, never goes down. The Fate token is a little more flexible. There will be negative effects that will move it towards the bottom of the track, but luckily enough, there will also be effects that will refresh the token, so we'll put it back up there. When your characters get knocked out, they are not eliminated of the game, so out of the game. There is no player elimination. You can just then revive your character, stand up, and you're still in the game. You don't have to sit there and watch other people play. However, there's still a negative effect in being knocked out, so you should try to avoid getting knocked out because the Fate token is moved towards the bottom. If the Fate token and the Doom token ever get to share the same space, then the players lose the game. So during the game, players will move on that on the map. New tiles will be added, selecting these cards here. But as I said, at the end of each turn in which the players activate, you have the Overlord's turn. During the Overlord's turn, first you have to resolve the Overlord effects, which are described in the red area at the bottom of the current location card. But what if there are no location cards available, because there may be effects that have discarded them? Well, If there are no location cards available on the table during the Overlord phase, you advance the Fate token by 1. Haha, that's tricky. And you also draw a Peril card. I'm not going to show you what these cards do. You can imagine it's bad stuff, negative effects that will happen. So that forces players to keep moving. Sometimes you like to rest and to get your characters to recover strength before they move on. But then if the main encounter is over, the counter that you were resolving, and you're not moving on to the next one, the Fate token keeps moving. So you have yourself to keep moving before the Fate token goes down too much. Very interesting way of keeping things snappy. So Overlord effects, or if no Overlord effects, Fate token and Peril card, and then the monsters that are on the board will activate. To activate the monsters, you draw a card and you resolve the monsters in this order. Suppose that I have flesh molders and zombies, then I resolve first these guys and then these guys. For each monster of the type that you are resolving, you follow the instructions here. Well, there may be general effects that apply for that turn in general to the effects, and then when the monsters actually activate, you simply follow the instructions one at a time, resolving as many of these actions as possible and moving through the track, through the list of orders that the monsters receive one at a time, and going back once you have resolved until each monster has resolved 2 actions, or there is a situation such as that the monster cannot resolve any actions. And this is how you resolve the actions of the monster. These are the AIs of the monsters. That means that with each card, the monsters will act in different ways. They will have different abilities. It brings a lot of variety and unpredictability in what the monsters can do. There are general tactics that they will try to follow, and you will see those emerge during gameplay. But at the same time, there's enough variety to keep things interesting. So that's how the AI will resolve the Overlord phase, will resolve what happens in the environment around you and how the monsters activate. Then it is back to the players, and they again will activate their characters. And the gameplay will continue like this, back and forth between the players/characters and the AI, until either the AI wins by placing the 2 tokens together on the Overlord track, or the players win by completing the mission. To me, Descent in co-op mode is what Descent was always meant to be. Actually, to me, it is what every dungeon crawl should be. Dungeon crawl games are a metaphor for human life. You have a group of people that come together, they rely on each other, they trust each other, they help each other, each in his or her own unique ways. It is a wonderful balance between individualism and working as a micro-society against adversities, against challenges, against the unknown. What a wonderful metaphor for human existence, and what a fun experience. You slay monsters, you steal their treasures. Does it get any better? It can get better if you're moving from semi-co-op way of doing that to a fully co-op way of doing so, which is what happens with Descent when you have Forgotten Souls. The components of Forgotten Souls are in here. This is why I'm not showing you the original box, which is one of those little plastic cases which I got rid of a long time ago. Forgotten Souls, you can purchase the expansion for around like $10. The instructions you will need to download from Fantasy Flight website. And it is a much welcome addition to the world of Descent, and it makes Descent a very nice addition to my personal world of dungeon crawls. The game is fun, the game is great. I liked Descent back then. As I told you earlier, I like the mechanics, I like how they were implemented, the abilities, the die rolls, the surges, the components, the miniatures. It looked like a great dungeon crawl from which one thing was missing, and now the thing is there. The game works very well as a co-op. You have all of the challenges that you would have in a competitive, semi-competitive game against the Overlord, with actually some added challenges. You have that sense of the time that is passing fast, the clock is ticking, Sometimes you will try to time things in such a way that one player does something that will remove a card, but then another player will get another card before the turn is over, so that then in the Overlord phase you do not trigger the Fate phase. But then there are just so many other effects that will bring Fate to move down the track and to increase the sense of dread that you have. Even when you are resolving a certain encounter cards, there are some cards that will force you to add counters on them at each turn that passes. That's another micro countdown clock within the larger countdown clock of the system, because then when you reach a certain number of tokens that you played on that card, that means after a certain amount of turns that the card is in play, bad stuff happens. The monsters behave in predictable ways, in a sense. Most of the specialized in range attacks will range attack you, but with enough variety to make things interesting, to make each encounter unique, to give you the sense that you're meeting different groups belonging to the same type of enemy. Family resemblance between the groups, but variety when it comes to each single encounter. But there is probably one negative that I want to point out, which is the staying power of this expansion is limited. This expansion only uses part of the components that you have in the base set, part of the monsters, part of the terrain tiles, and that limited amount of components will be scrambled in different ways in a different order from game to game, but they will remain more or less the same. The story cards are the same. A certain type of room that you kind of learn to know in one game, you may encounter it later in another game, you may encounter it earlier, but it'll most likely be there and it will still be more or less the same thing. So not great replay value, but I would say that probably you can play at least 4 or 5 times with adventure before it feels stale, especially the first time or two you lose the game, then you have the challenge of trying to crack it open. So not a long amount of time that you can play with, but it is pretty inexpensive. It is around $10, and if you think about it, of a full game night that probably will take you to play a full adventure, then you have a total amount of hours that you're playing the game, which probably is, the cost, if you calculate it away, would be less than $1 per hour. Per group, a group of 4 people. Well, if you go to the movies, it's much more expensive than that. Nevertheless, this expansion really makes me want more, leaves me wanting for more. I hope that they did this small expansion with a single adventure as sort of like a test to see how people would react. My reaction is completely positive, and I hope that maybe someone out there from Fantasy Flight is listening to this. If you were testing us, me as part of the us, as part of the gamers, I'm responding by telling you, test is successful, this is a great product, this is a great idea, I want to see more. I hope this is a test, they see how it goes, and then maybe they'll decide to make more. What I would really like to see would be a huge, I'd be happy with a big box of adventures. 10, 15 adventures. It seems huge, but each adventure pretty much would be a deck of cards, and maybe with some universal cards that can go in multiple adventures, and then some key story cards that will go in each of the 10, 15 adventures. I would love that. I would pay money, and I don't want to say how much because then they're gonna price it too high and I'll regret saying this. I would pay an appropriate amount of money for the pretty large amount of enjoyment that I think I could get from such a big box. Descent with more of these adventures and Shadows of Brimstone put together really will kill the D&D board games that I enjoyed very much in the past. I still see the value. I probably will use them to introduce non-gamers or very casual gamers to dungeon crawling. But for more seasoned gamers, I just think the Shadows of Brimstone and Descent in co-op mode just offer so much more. They're tactically superior, the AI is more subtle, there are more events, there are more situations that arise, the interaction of the characters with the environment is just better. I think that these games, Descent and Shadow of Brimstone, win over the D&D board games on so many levels. Descent Second edition, if you have it already, you owe it to yourself to invest 10 more bucks and try the co-op expansion. If you do not have Descent and you would like to try an excellent game in co-op mode, it may sound like a crazy proposition, but I did it, which is to purchase Descent and Forgotten Souls. You have been warned, you won't be able to play Forgotten Soul for a long time, but maybe it's an investment for the future, and hopefully Fantasy Flight will come up with more expansions such as Forgotten Souls in the future. For now, Forgotten Souls is a must for any person who played Descent or just anybody who enjoys dungeon crawling games.